Namaste and welcome to Daily News Simplified, the what, why and how of newspaper reading. Now we would be analyzing the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper of 27th of August 2019, and the news that would be covered today is given on the screen, and the timestamp for the same is given in the description and the comment section given below. And so now with this, let us start with the first section. Now, as part of our continuous coverage of questions that were asked in the prelims examination of 2019, the question that we're going to discuss is that building Kalyana Mandapa was a notable feature in the temple construction in the kingdom of, and the four options given are Chalukya, Chandel, Rashtrakut and Vijayanagara. Now, a similar question was asked in the test series, in particular FLT 6, whereby the question had asked, consider the following statements about the architecture of the South Indian empires. Whereby the first statement is that Pandyas are well known for the use of Kalyan Mandapa, a structure usually put on the left side of the temple entrance. Now, under the explanation which was provided for this FLT question, you would have understood that it was under the Vijayanagara kingdom, whose main characteristic structure was Kalyan Mandapa. And from this, you would have understood that the correct answer to this question would have been D, the Vijayanagara kingdom. And so now with this, let us move on to the first article for today. Now, we have taken this opinion-based editorial from page 11. Now, what this editorial talks about is the ongoing negotiations between India and the European Union over a free trade agreement. Now, this particular free trade agreement, which is being negotiated between India and the European Union, is known as BTIA, or the Broad-Based Trade Investment Agreement. Now, the author within this editorial is trying to make a point that India should hurry up its negotiations for a free trade agreement with the European Union, because a free trade agreement with the European Union is necessary for India in the coming future because of the ongoing trade war between the United States and China and the rise of protectionist measures that has been seen both in the United States and the United Kingdom. Now, what you need to know is that the negotiations between India and the European Union over the BTIA, or a free trade agreement, has been going on for quite a long time, whereby a question on the broad-based trade and investment agreement has already been asked in the prelims examination of 2017, whereby BTIA is sometimes seen in the news in the context of negotiations held between India and the European Union. Now, with regards to this editorial, what you need to understand is what are the various roadblocks that have caused a delay in the finalization of a free trade agreement between India and the European Union. Now, the first difference between India and the European Union with regards to the BTIA free trade agreement is whether the protection of foreign investments will be part of this particular free trade agreement or will be dealt in a separate agreement. Now, it was said a separate pact within the broad-based trade and investment agreement would be signed between India and the European Union with regards to protection of foreign investment. But this particular news with regards to formation of this pact came in 2013. And from 2013 till date, both India and the European Union have still not yet decided as to what would be the particular features and criteria within this investment protection pact. Now, one of the provisions under BTIA on which India is insisting upon is that India wants to make it mandatory for foreign investors to initially pursue Indian judicial and administrative remedies before making a claim under international law. Now, this provision, which is being insisted upon by India, is being opposed by the European Union. Now, let's say for an example, there is a company from the European Union which has invested within India. However, some issue has risen between the Income Tax Department of India and this European Union company. Now, what India wants is that this particular dispute should be first handled by the Indian judiciary and the Indian administrative staff. And it is only after a period of 5 years that this particular company can make a claim against India under international law. However, this particular policy provision is being opposed by the European Union, whereby they are not happy with this time period of 5 years and want the Indian government to reduce this particular time limit. Now, as you already might be aware of, one of the greatest exports from India is India's human resource. And what is generally seen is that most individuals from India migrate to two particular regions, first being the Western countries and second being the Gulf region. Now, within that context, India wants a greater ease of movement of temporary skilled workers to the European Union. However, what is currently being seen is that several European countries are pursuing a policy of protectionism, whereby several countries such as Italy, Spain, and others are currently seeing a rise in unemployment and have therefore restricted the movement of individuals to come and work within their country. Now, apart from this, another problem with regards to the movement of workers from India to the European Union is that immigration policies within the European Union is a decision which is undertaken by individual countries, and therefore it limits the mandate of the European Union to negotiate with regards to the movement of workers under a free trade agreement with India. Now, what this basically means is that the European Union cannot force Italy, Spain, and other countries to liberalize their immigration policies and allow Indian workers to freely work within any country of the European Union. Now, what you need to also know is that the European Union itself allows the free movement of European citizens among the various European countries. Now, it is within that context that India is forcing the European Union to follow a common policy with regards to the movement of Indian citizens to work within various European countries. However, the European Union does not want to impose such restrictions on the European countries. Now, as some of you might be aware of, France, Spain, Italy are one of the major exporters of wines and spirits. And therefore, what the European Union wants is a greater market access for its wines and spirit into India. Now, within that context, the European Union, under the Free Trade Agreement, wants India to lower its tariff for imports of wines and spirits. Now, within India, wines and spirits are considered a luxury item. And similarly, alcohol within India is also imposed what is called a sin tax. And therefore, according to the Indian government, there is no reasonable cause given by the European countries as to why India should reduce tariffs on what is considered as luxury items within India. Now, a major point of contention between India and the European Union is with regards to data protection. Now, the European Union considers that India is not able to protect the data of European citizens that come into India, whereby what has been seen is that several call centers or BPOs have been accused of leaking data of European citizens. And it is within that context that the European Union is not granting India the certification of a data secure country. Now, within that context, India is trying to form a data protection law, which might be similar to the data protection law of the European Union known as GDPR. Now, India is yet to form this law, and therefore data protection is still a point of contention between India and the European Union to be included within the broad-based trade and investment agreement. Now, the sixth point of difference between India and the European Union is with regards to agricultural products. Now, it has been said that agricultural products have been excluded from the negotiations for a free trade agreement between India and the European Union, whereby what the European countries want is that India should reduce the huge subsidy that it gives to its own agricultural products. However, a similar accusation has also been made by India, whereby agriculture products within the European Union are also provided huge subsidies. And therefore, what is being seen is that Indian agriculture products are also not able to compete within their European counterparts. Apart from this, the European Union has also asked India for a change in government procurement policies, especially with regards to the procurement of agriculture products. Now, India has already said that the subsidies that it provides to its agriculture products is based on ensuring the development of the agriculture sector within India, while the subsidies that have been provided by the European countries to its own farmers are rather driven by a profit motive, whereby according to India, the European countries do not want their own farmers to compete with the cheaper agriculture products being imported from India. Now, another point of contention that has been raised within the last year itself is with regards to the data localization rules within India, whereby, as you already might be aware of, a recent guideline by the Reserve Bank of India has said that there should be a compulsory localization of financial data within India. Now, this policy of India has been imposed by the European Union, whereby the European Union does not want its own e-commerce companies to follow such rules when they conduct business within India. Now, the last main point of contention between India and the European Union is that India currently enjoys benefits under the Generalized Scheme of Preferences or the GSP scheme of the European Union. But the European Union has not currently made it clear whether such benefits would be extended to India under the Free Trade Agreement, whereby a common fear within India is that the European Union may use this negotiation process for a free trade agreement to withdraw the GSP benefits from India, which has also been done by the United States. Now, these are the 9 main points of differences between India and the European Union with regards to their negotiations for a free trade agreement known as the Broad Based Trade and Investment Agreement or the BTIA. Now, this article and the explanation given in this section should be seen from the perspective of GS Paper 2 within the section International Relations. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this lead editorial from the editorial page on page 10. Now this lead editorial is quite political in nature. Now, as you already might be aware of, restrictions have been imposed in Jammu and Kashmir after changes were made to the status of Jammu and Kashmir, whereby what happened was that Jammu and Kashmir state was changed into the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir and the Union Territory of Ladakh. Now, several petitions have been filed in the Supreme Court challenging the restrictions which have been imposed in the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. However, the Supreme Court has said that the situation in Jammu and Kashmir is primarily a security related issue that is best left to decide to the Government of India and the armed forces. Therefore, what has happened is that the Supreme Court has left it to the central government to decide when to lift the restrictions which have been imposed in the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, the author has said that the Supreme Court is taking a casual approach, and the justification given by the Supreme Court to not intervene in the Jammu and Kashmir matter is basically a negation of the rule of law, whereby according to the author, the Supreme Court is faltering or not properly undertaking the responsibility as the guardian or the protector of constitutional rights of Indian citizens. Whereby according to the author, the Supreme Court is not protecting the rights of Jammu and Kashmir citizens under Article 21, which is the right to life and liberty. Now, apart from this, the author is comparing today's scenario in Jammu and Kashmir to a period when emergency was imposed in India, whereby the author highlights the case of Additional District Magistrate versus S.S. Shukla of 1976, whereby within this particular judgment, the Supreme Court allowed the suspension of habeas corpus during when emergency was imposed on India. Similarly, the author highlights the case of P. Chidambaram, in which, according to the author, the judiciary is again faltering. However, as of now, we will not go further into depth in any of the ongoing political cases, either with regards to Jammu and Kashmir or with regards to P. Chidambaram. So, hopefully, up till here, you've understood the main crux of this editorial. Now, the main aspect that you actually need to understand with regards to your civil services examination from this editorial is what is the writ of habeas corpus. Now, writ of habeas corpus basically means that a court within India can order that an arrested person by the state should be presented before it, whereby the court can set this particular person free if the court decides if the manner in which this particular person has been detained or arrested is not as per law, or the reason given by the government to detain this person is not satisfactory. Therefore, habeas corpus is an order which is issued by the court, whereby the court would examine the cause and legality of the detention, and if the detention is found to be illegal, then the court can set the detained person free. Therefore, this writ of habeas corpus is considered as a part of India's constitutional remedy, which can act to protect individual liberty against arbitrary detention. Now, Article 32 of the Constitution of India, under the right to constitutional remedies, provides the right to Indian citizens to move to the Supreme Court for the enforcement of their fundamental rights, whereby the Supreme Court has the power to issue directions, order, or writs, including the writ of habeas corpus, to protect the fundamental rights of Indian citizens. Apart from this, Article 32 also provides the Parliament of India to empower any other court within India to also exercise the power of issuing a writ including the writ of habeas corpus. Now, under Article 226 of the Indian Constitution, the High Courts within India have been provided the right to also issue writs within India. Now, apart from this, under Article 139 of the Constitution of India, Parliament by law confer the Supreme Court powers to issue direction order or writs for any other purpose than those mentioned under Clause 2 of Article 32. Therefore, within that regard, what you need to know is that the writ of habeas corpus is not issued is first when the detention of that particular individual is lawful, secondly, when the proceeding against that particular individual is for contempt of either the legislature or of the court itself, thirdly, if the detention of that particular person has been done by a competent court, and lastly, if the detention of that particular individual is outside the jurisdiction of the court itself. Now, these are the main points that you needed to understand about the writ of habeas corpus. So now hopefully you've understood both the aspects, first being the crux of today's lead editorial, and secondly, what is habeas corpus. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this opinion-based editorial from the editorial page on page 10. Now what this editorial talks about is the Udan scheme, or what is known as the Ude Desh Ka Aam Nagrik scheme. Now this Udan scheme has been given out by the Ministry of Civil Aviation, whereby the implementing agency for the Udan scheme is the Airport Authority of India. Now civil aviation is a central subject within India, and therefore states have to look up to the central government for the development of airports and enhancing air connectivity within their own state. However, according to the author, the Udan scheme, which is a regional connectivity scheme, has emerged as an important example of cooperative federalism, whereby this scheme improves the stake and the capability of states within India with regards to air connectivity, whereby what is currently being seen is that 30 states and union territories have already signed Memorandum of Understandings or MOUs with the central government to improve airports and air connectivity within their own state. Now within that context, the author highlights various steps that can be undertaken by states within India so as to further improve air connectivity within their own state. Now the first step which has been highlighted by the author is that the cost of aviation turbine fuel or ATF forms about 40% of the total operational cost for airlines. Now currently petroleum products including aviation turbine fuel are outside the purview of the GST tax. Therefore what is seen is that the states have the right to impose their own taxes on petroleum products including aviation turbine fuel. Now within that context, the author has highlighted that several states within India have very high rates of value added tax or VAT on aviation turbine fuel, whereby some states are even charging as high as 25% tax on aviation turbine fuel. Now according to the author, this has negatively impacted the growth of civil aviation sector in states with high taxes. Now within that context, the author makes the point that states need to reduce the tax rate for aviation turbine fuel. Now according to the author, any loss in tax revenue which the state might face by reducing the tax rate on aviation turbine fuel would be a notional revenue loss, whereby basically what the author is trying to say is that because of the decrease in aviation turbine fuel, more airlines would be willing to come to those states, and therefore when these airlines come to these states and improve their air connectivity, then it would lead to an increase in economic activities within that states, whereby it would lead to an increase in employment, it would also lead to an increase in tourism and various other economic activities. Therefore, according to the author, if let's say a state loses rupees 10,000 by reducing the VAT that has been imposed on aviation turbine fuel, then the amount of money that this state would be earning by the improved economic activities such as tourism, increase in employment would be more than rupees 10,000. Basically more than the money that the state would have earned by imposing a higher tax on aviation turbine fuel. Now within this context, the author has highlighted that Udan scheme has motivated various state governments across India to reduce the value added tax on aviation turbine fuel to around 1%, whereby airports such as Jharsuguda in Odisha or Kolhapur in Maharashtra have successfully attracted airlines to connect these unconnected regions. Now, the second step highlighted by the author is with regards to the development and management of airports. Now, according to the author, there are many regional airports which can be developed by states on their own, or they can be developed in collaboration with the Airports Authority of India. And apart from this, states can also undertake public private partnership to also improve these airports. The third step highlighted by the author is that airlines and airports must be supported within Himalayan states so as to develop air services within remote regions of India. Now, within this context, the author has said that to reduce operational cost of airlines and airport operators, especially in rough terrains of Himalayan states, financial support should be provided by the central government to the state government. Apart from this, the state should ensure a reduction within the value added tax on aviation turbine fuel. Apart from this, non financial incentives such as providing security, free fire services should also be provided by the state government to the airport operators. Now, these are the three main steps which has been highlighted by the author, which states within India can undertake to further improve air connectivity within their own state. Now, this editorial and the explanation given in this section should be seen from the perspective of GS Paper 3 within the section Economic Development and within the subsection Infrastructure, in particular airports. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now, we have taken this article from page 1. Now, what has happened is that the Reserve Bank of India has decided to transfer 1.76 lakh crore to the central government. Now, this current transfer from the Reserve Bank of India to the central government has been based on the recommendations given under the Bimal Jalan Committee report. Now, the first thing that you need to know with regards to this article is why does the Reserve Bank of India pay a dividend to the Government of India? Now, the Reserve Bank of India is a statutory body which was formed under the Reserve Bank of India Act of 1934. Now, Section 47 of the RBI Act states that profits which have been made by the Reserve Bank of India has to be sent to the central government. Now, what you need to understand is that the Reserve Bank of India is completely owned by the central government. Therefore, within that regard, the central government is the sole shareholder of the Reserve Bank of India. So, any profit that the Reserve Bank of India makes has to be paid back to its only shareholder, which is the central government. And this is the reason why the Reserve Bank of India pays a dividend to the Government of India. Now, the second aspect that you need to understand is that during last year, there was a tussle between the Government of India and the Reserve Bank of India. Now, during 2017-18, the Reserve Bank of India had about 10 lakh crore as its RBI reserve. Now, the Government of India wanted the Reserve Bank of India to transfer most of this amount. However, the Reserve Bank of India at that time was reluctant and said that it cannot transfer the amount that the Government of India was asking for, since it needs to maintain a buffer because the Reserve Bank of India is the banker of last resort. And apart from this, it also needed some amount of money to be kept with the Reserve Bank of India so that it is able to ensure monetary stability within India. Now, after this, the Bimal Jalan Committee was formed, whereby the purview of the Bimal Jalan Committee was to review the economic capital framework and thereby suggest measures as to what should be the quantum or basically the amount of provisions that needs to be kept with the Reserve Bank of India and how much money the Reserve Bank of India can transfer to the Government of India. Now, it is with regards to the recommendation given out by the Bimal Jalan Committee that we come to today, whereby based on the recommendations of this committee, the Reserve Bank of India transferred 1.76 lakh crore to the Government of India. Now, this current transfer from the Reserve Bank of India to the Government of India is based on the definition of economic capital given out by the Bimal Jalan Committee, whereby the Bimal Jalan Committee has defined economic capital as a combination of the realized equity and the revaluation reserves. Now, within this context, let us take a personal example. Now, let's say you as a person might be earning a salary, or you might also have some fixed deposit in a bank through which you might also be earning interest. Apart from this, you might also have a residential or a commercial property from which you might also be earning a rental income. Now, this amount of money which you get every month is your realized equity. Now, apart from this, also consider that you might have purchased some shares in the stock market. Apart from this, you might also have some form of gold jewelry. And similarly, you might also have your own residential or commercial property. Now, all of these aspects are part of your revaluation reserve. So let's say if you have purchased the gold jewelry in 2015 when it was around rupees 20,000, and in 2019 it might have been around 30,000, whereby the value of this particular jewelry has increased by rupees 10,000. Similarly, the value of your residential property might have also increased by, let's say, 20%, or the value of your shares might have also increased by 10%. However, this increase in the value of asset is considered as a notional increase, whereby basically if you choose not to sell your shares or your gold jewelry or your residential and commercial property, all this increase in value is basically on paper. And if you do not sell them, they cannot be considered as being realized equity. So simply the real income that you have is part of your realized equity, while assets that you might have which may increase or decrease in value are part of your revaluation reserve. So your residential or your commercial property is part of your revaluation reserve, while the income that you might earn by giving it out for rent would be your real income and thereby become a part of your realized equity. Now you need to understand that this is only an example that is supposed to help you in understanding the difference of realized equity and revaluation reserve on a personal level. Now this is the same case with the Reserve Bank of India, whereby the Reserve Bank of India earns money by charging interest on giving out loans to public sector banks or private sector banks. Similarly, it also charges interest on giving out government bonds or government securities. Apart from this, the Reserve Bank of India also takes a management commission on handling the borrowings of state governments and the central government. Now, all of this forms a part of the realized equity of the Reserve Bank of India. Now, apart from this, the Reserve Bank of India also keeps a lot of foreign currencies and securities of foreign governments with itself. So let's say if the Reserve Bank of India had purchased 100 US dollars in 2017 when its exchange rate was about rupees 70. Now let's say in 2019 this $100 which is with the Reserve Bank of India might have been increased to rupees 76. Now what this basically means is that the value of this asset for the Reserve Bank of India has increased by rupees 600, and thereby what this basically means is that rupees 600 has been increased in the revaluation reserves of the Reserve Bank of India. Similarly, the Reserve Bank of India also keeps a lot of gold with itself. And again, the value of gold in 2019 has increased, and therefore the total value of gold which is kept with the Reserve Bank of India would have also increased as part of its revaluation reserve. Now, the Reserve Bank of India transfers this realized equity to the Government of India. But it is this revaluation reserve which the Reserve Bank of India does not transfer to the Government of India, because any increase in the valuation of these reserves, such as of gold or the US dollar, would mean that first the Reserve Bank of India would have to sell that particular gold or that particular $100, and it is only after that it can transfer it to the Government of India. Now, this is a policy which the Reserve Bank of India does not do, whereby it needs to maintain a particular level of reserves of gold or the special drawing rights of the IMF or the US dollar or the European euro and of other foreign currencies, so as to maintain macroeconomic stability of forex reserves within India. And it is only when the Reserve Bank of India itself decides that it needs to sell some US dollars so as to maintain macroeconomic stability within India, and thereby earns some amount of profit from the selling of the US dollar, and then forms it as a part of its realized equity, then it is only able to transfer it to the Government of India. But the Reserve Bank of India will not sell its revaluation reserve only for the purpose of transferring it as part of the realized equity to the Government of India, whereby it is only going to do this so as to maintain the macroeconomic stability within India, and not for the only purpose of increasing the amount of dividend that it pays to the Government of India. Now you have to understand that this was a simplified explanation only for your understanding. Now, within this context, the Bimal-Jalan committee had said that the revaluation reserves only have a notional value, whereby they represent unrealized valuation gains and hence cannot be distributed. And with regards to the realized equity, what the Bimal-Jalan committee had said is that if the realized equity is above the requirement of 6.5% to 5.5% of the RBI balance sheet, then the entire net income of the Reserve Bank of India can be transferred to the Government of India. Now, as of now, what has been seen is that the realized equity of the Reserve Bank of India currently stands at 6.8% of the balance sheet, which is higher than the criteria set by the Bimal-Jalan committee of 6.5 to 5.5%. So within that context, the 1.23 lakh crore, which was the entire net income of the Reserve Bank of India, was transferred to the Government of India. And similarly, what also the Reserve Bank of India did was minus this 6.8% to 5.5%, which further led to 52,000 crore as excess provision being kept by the Reserve Bank of India. Therefore, the Reserve Bank of India decreased its realized equity from 6.8% to 5.5% and transferred the 52,000 crore further to the Government of India, thereby leading to the total of rupees 1.76 lakh crore. So now hopefully you've understood the current context of this article, and mainly you've understood the distinction between the two components of economic capital, realized equity and revaluation balance. Now you need to understand that this particular policy followed by the Reserve Bank of India, based on the recommendations of the Bimal-Jalan committee, is going to be further analyzed and critiqued in your upcoming newspaper. And hopefully the explanation given in today's section would help you in understanding the evolution of this news in the coming future. Now this article and the explanation given in this section should be seen from the perspective of GS Paper 3 within the section Economic Development. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this opinion-based editorial from page 11. Now, as you already might be aware of, several PILs or public interest litigations have been filed in the Supreme Court and in the High Court with regards to linking Aadhaar card with your social media accounts. Now, within that regard, the main crux of today's editorial is that the author is trying to say is that the regulatory provisions to handle cybercrimes, especially related to social media, is the mandate of the executive and not the judiciary. Therefore, within that regard, the author is trying to say is that if the judiciary provides the various guidelines with regards to regulation of social media, then it would be a form of judicial overreach, whereby according to the author, the judiciary would be reaching into the area or the mandate which is of the executive. And because the executive is not properly fulfilling its responsibility of combating cybercrimes, especially with regards to social media, it does not give the right to the judiciary to regulate on this issue. Now, as we have already covered in a previous DNS video, the Madras High Court has already said that it is not interested in linking the Aadhaar card to social media accounts. However, what is happening is that this case is pending in the Supreme Court. And as we had already discussed when this news first appeared in the Hindu newspaper and was discussed in the Daily News Simplified video of 22nd of August, the Supreme Court is going to decide on the issue of linking social media accounts with Aadhaar card, and therefore this topic should be considered as news in transition, whereby it is best to wait for the verdict of the Supreme Court on this particular issue. Now, what is required to be understood from this editorial is the problems of investigation and how the Cloud Act of the United States can help India with regards to investigation of cybercrime. Now, the main problem which has been highlighted by the author is that various security agencies within India can seek information from various online platforms or basically social media companies such as Facebook, Google and others, whereby this provision has already been provided under the CRPC and the Information Technology Act. However, the current problem is that the investigative agencies are not able to get this information because the social media companies are basically located within the United States. Now, currently, 8 of the top 10 websites which are accessed in India, such as Facebook, Google, and others, are owned by companies within the United States. Therefore, the Indian enforcement agencies such as the CBI or the police across several states within India have to put up a request to the US government under the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty, whereby what would happen is that the Indian enforcement agencies would give a request under this particular treaty to obtain information for evidence from US entities. So basically, what would happen is that the Indian investigative agency, let's say the CBI, would put up a request to the US government under the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty. Now, if the US government considers that the request is proper, it would then forward this request to the US entities such as Facebook, Google, and others. Now, when this request goes to the US entities, then the US entities would decide whether the information which has been asked is proper or not. And afterwards, when the US entities consider the request for information by the Indian enforcement agencies is proper, then it would provide that particular information to the Indian government. Similarly, the Indian investigative agencies can go directly to the US entities such as Facebook, Google, and others. But for such US based companies, they have to first ask permission from the US government before sharing information with any foreign jurisdiction, whereby the information of all the users on, let's say, Facebook is currently kept in the United States, and therefore this becomes a property of the US government. And therefore, if the US companies want to share this information with any foreign jurisdiction, they have to ask the permission of the US government. Now, this process, as we have already understood, is now quite lengthy and cumbersome, whereby what would happen is that the complete procedure would hinder the investigation, especially on cyber crimes. Now, what had happened recently is that the Justice Sri Krishna Committee report and the Personal Data Protection Bill of 2018 had recommended for data localization, meaning that the foreign companies such as Facebook, Google, and others had to store a copy of their data which they have generated from India within the borders of India. Now, as you already understood, the Reserve Bank of India has also given out a similar order, whereby India's financial data has to be kept only within the borders of India. Now, one of the main advantages of localization of such data within India is that it would ensure that such technology companies can provide quicker access to Indian enforcement agencies, since this particular data would then not be placed within the United States and thereby within the jurisdiction of the US government, whereby through data localization, this data would be kept within India and therefore within the jurisdiction of the Indian government. However, there is a particular problem with regards to data localization, whereby a particular rule of the US government is that US entities, even if they keep a copy of a data localized within any foreign jurisdiction, they still would have to ask the permission of the US government for even sharing this copy of data. Apart from this, another problem with regards to data localization is that this data would only be on Indian citizen, and therefore it would not help in transnational crimes. Now, within that context, the author has highlighted the Cloud Act of the US government, whereby under the Cloud Act, it would allow the US entities to share data directly with agreed upon foreign government. And apart from this, the Cloud Act also allows a foreign government to access the data of citizens who are not belonging to their own country. So basically, if India signs an agreement with the United States under the Cloud Act, it would allow the various US entities such as Facebook, Google to directly share user data with the Indian government. And similarly, if there has been a transnational crime involving citizens of Pakistan, then the Cloud Act also would allow Facebook, Google, and other US companies to share this data with the Indian government. Now, for India to have an agreement with the United States under the Cloud Act, India needs to ensure an effective act with regards to protection of personal data. And it is only after that India has proper legislative measures with regards to protection of personal data that it can afterwards negotiate with the US government to grant India partnership under the Cloud Act. So now hopefully you've understood the second main crux of this editorial. Now the explanation given in this section should be seen from the perspective of GS paper 3 within the section security. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 14. Now, as you already might be aware of, several articles with regards to Brexit have been continuously appearing in the Hindu newspaper, whereby what is happening is that by 31st of October, both Britain and the European Union need to sign a Brexit deal. Now, important information with regards to Brexit was covered in a much earlier Daily News Simplified video of 12th of April 2019, whereby it was during this time that it was decided that the Brexit deal has to be signed by 31st of October. Now, this particular date was decided by the previous Prime Minister Theresa May. And from that time onwards, and even with the appointment of a new Prime Minister Boris Johnson, no further improvement has happened with regards to signing of a Brexit deal between Britain and the European Union. Now what I'll do is attach this particular section of the video from the Daily News Simplified of 12th of April, and from which you can understand about Brexit from the perspective of both prelims and mains examination. Now to understand in what aspect Brexit is important for your prelims examination, what we'll do is try to understand a previous year question that was asked in the prelims examination of 2018. Now what this question had asked, the term two-state solution is sometimes mentioned in the news in the context of affairs of, and the correct answer to this question would be B, Israel. Now by understanding why this question was asked in the prelims examination of 2018, you would understand as to what aspects of Brexit are important for your 2019 prelims examination. Now what had happened was that in 2017, the United States moved its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, whereby Tel Aviv is basically the de facto capital of Israel, in which the Indian embassy is also located, while Jerusalem is claimed as capital by both Israel and Palestine. Now this decision of the United States to move its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem became a current event or a current issue of international importance, because it was decided by the international community and by the United Nations that any solution to Jerusalem would be decided by both Israel and Palestine, and it would be decided between Israel and Palestine based on the two-state solution, whereby what would happen is that there would be a separate country called Israel and there would be a separate country called Palestine, and between both of them they would decide as to what should happen to the territory of Jerusalem. However, because of this US decision to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and thereby accepting Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and thereby a territory of Israel, it violated the two-state solution. Now, it was within this context that the two-state solution was asked in your prelims examination of 2018, whereby two-state solution became of international importance because of the current event of the United States moving its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And it is within that context that we have to understand various aspects of the international importance of the current event of Brexit. Now, it is not necessary that the current event in itself would be asked in your prelims examination, whereby what might happen is that the international importance of that current event might be asked. And therefore, what we're going to understand in today's section are the various important aspects of international importance that have come up due to the recent decision of Brexit. Now, the first current event within itself would be Britain leaving the European Union. And the main international importance of the British withdrawal from the European Union is that it is the first and only invocation of Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty. Now, in simple terms, the Lisbon Treaty was agreed upon in 2009, and it basically amended the Treaty of Rome and the Treaty of Maastricht. Now, in the simplest of terms, the Rome Treaty and the Maastricht Treaty led to the formation of the European Union. However, because of the current expansion of the European Union, it became necessary so as to ensure further smoothening of the functioning of the European Union. And it was within that context that the Lisbon Treaty was signed in 2009 so as to amend the Rome Treaty and the Maastricht Treaty so as to ensure smooth functioning of the European Union. Now, before the Lisbon Treaty was signed, there were three territories which left the European Union. First was French Algeria, second was Greenland, and third was a territory of France, whereby Algeria was a colony of France, whereby Greenland is basically a territory of Denmark. And both of these regions decided to leave the European Union. However, after the Lisbon Treaty was signed, an Article 50 was inserted, which allowed for a European member country to leave the European Union. Britain became the first country in the world to use Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty to withdraw from the European Union. Now, this is what you needed to understand with regards to the current event of British withdrawal from the European Union. Now, the second current event is that Britain is leaving the customs union of the European Union. Now, what we mean by the European Union Customs Union is that every country within the European Union apply the same customs for any product that is coming from any country outside the European Union. So let's say if India is exporting a good to Italy, then both Italy and UK and every other country of the European Union Customs Union would be applying the same customs duties on the import of Indian products. However, with Britain leaving the European Union Customs Union, Britain then would have the luxury of imposing its own customs duties on import of products from other countries, including countries of the European Union. However, this has created a problem of international importance, whereby it would lead to a customs border between the country of Ireland and Britain. Now, if you take a look at this map, Britain only shares a land border with the country of Ireland. Now, since Britain and Ireland were both members of the customs union of the European Union, then any product from the country of Ireland that needed to be moved to Britain would not require to go through customs checks on the border between Britain and Ireland. And similarly, any product of Britain would not require to go through customs checks when moving to Ireland. However, now, because Britain is leaving the European Union Customs Union, it would lead to a customs border between Ireland and Britain. And this has created a problem with regards to the land border between the Northern Ireland Territory of Britain and the country of Ireland. And therefore, to ensure that there is no customs border between Britain and Ireland, an Irish backstop agreement is being negotiated between the government of Britain and the European Union officials. Now, this Irish backstop agreement is therefore required between the country of Ireland and between Britain so that no form of customs border is formed. However, the European officials, the country of Ireland, and mainly the politicians within Britain are not able to decide as to what form of a backstop agreement that they would require, so as to ensure that no form of customs checks are formed between Britain and Ireland. Now, the third main current event about Brexit that you need to know is that Britain is also leaving the common market of the European Union. Now, in simple terms, what the European Common Market does is that it allows the free movement of people, goods, services, and capital among the various members of the European Union. Now, a major contention among the people who voted for Brexit was of the continuous immigration that was coming into the United Kingdom from other European members. Now, one of the main demands of the people who voted for Brexit was that they leave the European Common Market, so that the immigrants that are coming from European countries would not steal the jobs of the local population, whereby they had no desire of the free movement of people from various European countries to Britain. However, this has created a problem of international importance between the country of Ireland and the region of Northern Ireland of Britain, whereby it violates the Good Friday Agreement that was signed between the government of Ireland, the government of Britain, and by the political parties of Northern Ireland. Now, this Good Friday Agreement was negotiated between the government of Britain, government of Ireland, and the political parties within Northern Ireland. However, this agreement was only signed between the government of Ireland and the government of Britain and became effective in the year 1999. Now, again, if you take a look at this map, as you already understand, there is a land border between the area of Northern Ireland of Britain and between the country of Ireland. Now, there was a conflict between the people of Northern Ireland and the people of Ireland. Now, the main reason of this conflict was that the people of Northern Ireland were basically Protestant Christians, while the people of the country of Ireland were basically Catholic Christians. And the unofficial names of this conflict was Troubles. Now, to solve this Northern Ireland conflict, the government of Britain and the government of Ireland signed the Good Friday Agreement, which became effective in 1999. And some of the principles of the Good Friday Agreement was that there would be a free travel area, easier movement of people and goods between Northern Ireland and Ireland, whereby even the people of Northern Ireland are able to take up the passport of the country of Ireland and therefore could have dual citizenship of both Britain and of Ireland if they wanted. However, the problem that has come up now is that the country of Ireland is still a member of the European Union, but Britain has decided to leave the European Common Market. And therefore it has caused concerns as to whether it would violate the principles of the Good Friday Agreement. Now, the fourth and the last aspect that you need to know is about the dispute settlement mechanism between the European Union and Britain. Now, currently any dispute between the European countries or the European Union and between Britain is being solved by the European Court of Justice. However, it is yet to be seen as to what would be the dispute settlement mechanism between the European Union and Britain after Brexit, whereby what can happen is that the European Union and Britain can negotiate for a separate mechanism so as to solve trade disputes between them, or they can utilize the dispute settlement mechanism of the World Trade Organization, or they can continue with the European Court of Justice. So now let's say for an example that if India and the European Union have a trade dispute, they go to the World Trade Organization. However, if the United Kingdom or any member of the European Union have a trade dispute, they go to the European Court of Justice. However, if there is no deal between the European Union and Britain as to what would be their dispute settlement mechanism, then the fallback option would be the World Trade Organization. Now it is within this context that you need to understand two things. First, that the European Court of Justice currently solves any trade dispute between the United Kingdom and any member of the European Union. And the second aspect that you need to know is that if no Brexit deal is signed between the European Union and Britain, then it would be the World Trade Organization that would solve the trade disputes between European Union and Britain. Now these are the four aspects that you need to know with regards to the current event of Brexit and the various aspects of international importance that it has raised. Now apart from this, what you also need to know is that it is not required that you understand about the Lisbon Treaty, the Rome Treaty, the Maastricht Treaty, the Good Friday Agreement or the European Court of Justice further in depth with regards to your prelims examination. Whereby what is required for you to remember with regards to Brexit for your prelims examination are just the basic purposes of the Lisbon Treaty, the Good Friday Agreement, the European Court of Justice, and what is the common market and the customs union of the European Union. And hopefully with the explanation given in this section, you would be able to answer any of these questions if they're asked in your prelims examination. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now there are two questions for practice, and what you need to do is pause this video, solve both of these questions, and wait for 5 seconds for the correct answer. Now with regards to question number 1, the generalized definition given out by the Reserve Bank of India for revaluation reserve is that revaluation reserves arise from the revaluation of assets that are currently undervalued on a bank's book, whereby such revaluation reserves can be relied upon as a cushion for unexpected losses. Now within that regard, both statement number 1 and 2 would be correct, and therefore the correct answer to question number 1 would be C, both 1 and 2. Now with regards to question number 2, the correct answer is D, 1, 2, 3 and 4, whereby all of these 4 points were within the terms of references of the Bimal-Jalan Committee. Now there are 2 more questions for practice, and as you already understand, pause this video, solve both of these questions and wait for 5 seconds for the correct answer. Now with regards to question number 3, statement number 1 is wrong, whereby both the Supreme Court and the High Courts within India are empowered within the Constitution to issue writ of Habeas Corpus, whereby the High Courts are empowered under Article 226. While statement number 2 is correct, whereby the citizens have the right to move to the Supreme Court for enforcing right to constitutional remedies. Therefore, the correct answer to question number 3 is B, 2 only. Now with regards to question number 4, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement is being negotiated among the ASEAN members. While the Free Trade Agreement negotiated by the members of the African Union is the African Continental Free Trade Area. While with regards to the second option, overlooking the typo, the Broad-Based Trade and Investment Agreement is being negotiated between the European Union and India. Therefore, the correct answer to this question would be B, 2 only. And now with this, we come to an end in the analysis of today's newspaper. Now we move on to the question for today.